live long, and prosper. Is that appropriate to do for this video? Should I do something more Orville? I don't really have a hand gesture. And until next time, I'll be trying to open up this jar of pickles. Hello interwebs and welcome to my channel. So for today's video, I want to do a review of The Orville Season 2. Because honestly, The Orville Season 2 blew me away by how much better it was than The Orville Season 1. And I really think we need to take some time to discuss it and kind of break down some of the things that I thought really worked about the show and why I'm very excited for its potential Season 3 that I hope you give me. Fox, damn it, I want it so bad. And no, but before I get into that, I like The Orville and I like Star Trek Discovery. I know that's crazy and wild, especially here on YouTube. You can like two things, you don't have to hate one and love the other. I know, it's crazy, right? I'm insane liking things, weird. To be clear, I like both The Orville and Star Trek Discovery. I think it's ridiculous to say that you can only like one or only like the other. And again, there are people who like both The Orville and Star Trek Discovery. I'm not hating on every other Trek YouTuber or anyone who likes The Orville or Discovery. You can like both, you can hate one, you can hate the other. It doesn't really matter to me as long as you have backed up reasons for that and aren't just doing to just say like, I'm gonna hate on Star Trek Discovery because blah politics or blah representation and forced diversity and all that jazz. Or I hate on The Orville because it's dumb and stupid. Anyone who likes The Orville is a stupid person. Like I hate all of that stuff. Don't do that. You can love or hate one. Just have reasons for it. That's all I ask. Anyways, with that disclaimer out of the way, I kind of looked at my love of Star Trek Discovery and The Orville as two distinct things. I thought Star Trek Discovery was taking things into a bold new direction for Star Trek that sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. It always swung for the fences, swung high, and sometimes it would whiff the ball and strike out, or sometimes it would have a home run. The Orville, however, I saw it as more of comfort food, especially during its first season. I liked what it had to say, I liked the episodes, but it never really hit this like top tier greatness for me. It never really felt like it was swinging for the fences or trying to do something new. It really felt like it was just trying to ape on Star Trek and more specifically Star Trek The Next Generation. And so I felt like it was comfort food in the sense that it was something new, something that I could sit down and watch and feel like I was watching a new show and felt like I was being like, oh, up to date with the new science fiction shows out there today. But also was giving me a little bit of like that like comfort food of like, oh, I'm watching an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. Oh, this is like watching a decent episode of Next Generation. And that started off being what season 2 of The Orville was for me. Again, the first 3 or 4 episodes of the season didn't really hit any particular highs for me. There was some interesting ideas here and there, but all of it felt half-baked. It never felt like there was a completed arc. I believe it was the first episode of the season, Joy Loja, the dating episode, that was like dealing with issues of dating and things like that, and there were some setups and first dates and jokes and stuff like that, but it never really had any payoff or anything super interesting to me. And that's kind of how the first few episodes of the season really felt to me. There was an episode, Home, where we had our security officer go back home, and again, there were some interesting ideas there, an interesting setup of this girl who felt like she wasn't smart enough to be part of her family, and so she went into security, and at the end of the episode, she just beat some people up, and there was no real like mystery or her like being a detective or figuring things out. Her family, she just beats people up and then her family accepts her. And the plot and minutia of that episode didn't really work for me, although there was some bits and pieces of it that I did enjoy. But what was interesting in the first few episodes that really just set season 2 off on a really interesting course was this fact that it started to have a more serialized tone. Now, what I mean by that is Star Trek Discovery is super serialized. You can't watch really any episode of Star Trek Discovery without having seen what comes before or else you'll be confused. Whereas The Orville, you could watch any episode at any point, just grab one, pick one up, and you can pretty much understand. But we were starting to see narrative threads start to weave themselves in between episodes. The biggest one, especially at the start of the season, and even throughout all of season 2, but carrying on from season 1, was with Bortus. We got to see him dealing with the trauma and the emotional weight of him having to force his child to be a boy when he was born female, and that sort of intersex episode that they did in season 1. And I was fascinated by this, not just because I'm interested in LGBTQ issues in general, but because I'm super fascinated by this thinly weaving in character development throughout the show. And that's something that we never really totally got to see in Star Trek The Next Generation. The problem with Star Trek The Next Generation was that it was syndicated when it came out, which means it would air at different times on different stations around the country. And so because no one really knew exactly when it was going to be on or when people would be watching it in what order, they really just had to make every episode self-contained. And that's what The Orville does for the most part. but it allows itself to be a little bit more modern and weave these interesting character development throughout the entire season. And I think that really starts to pay off fantastically here in season 2 of the Orville. And I think that's really what makes this show stand out against Star Trek and Star Trek Discovery, that it has this episodic structure, but also has interesting thematic threads that tie throughout it, and allows it to be sort of its own beast in a way that's distinct from Star Trek, the original series, and Next Generation Star Trek as a franchise, but also Star Trek Discovery, which is kind of its main competitor at this point. And I'm sorry that I'm comparing it to that other show and not just taking it on its own merits, but I think it's a worthwhile discussion to have because I think it illuminates some really great features of the Orville. So what do I mean by that? Well, one of the first stories that I found was fantastic was this development of this relationship between Isaac, this robot from another race, and the Doctor on the show. And we started to see this thread of those two dating throughout the entire season. So we got some really great small hints at that relationship throughout season 1 and in season 2 that it really kind of came all to a head during the episode A Happy Refrain, which felt like it was a retelling of a Star Trek to the Next Generation episode where Data started dating a girl. We had the same sort of beats here with Isaac dating the Doctor of the Orville. But what made it work was because in Next Generation, it was just a one-off episode and that relationship only lasted that episode. This, we had got to see the before and we get to see the aftermath of that. And they actually continue it and not just keeping it self-contained, which really made it feel really developed and earned when that episode happened. It was absolutely fantastic. And it managed to weave in some funny comedic elements that didn't feel superfluous or just sort of tacked on like earlier episodes of the Orville did. A lot of the comedy in earlier episodes didn't really work for me because it just felt like they were just shoving a comedy bit into the episode. Whereas after this point, throughout the rest of the series, the comedy felt like it came naturally from the situation and wasn't the main focus of the show, but allowed it to have a little less serious tone that like shows like The Next Generation or Deep Space Nine seem to have most of the time. And I think that worked fantastically and really made me fall in love with the characters. I think the character work throughout this whole season was fantastic, and laying those as narrative threads throughout the entire season just worked fantastically. And going back to the Isaac and the Doctor storyline, I think paid off beautifully in the episode's Identity, which is really where the Orville grew its beard. It was the two-part episodes where we were dealing with the invasion from the robot race that Isaac is from. And I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of the alien race. The Kalons, maybe? I can't remember. It's escaping my mind at the moment, and I apologize. I'm sure someone in the comments is gonna yell at me. Identity was fantastic. Again, it felt like it was paying off character development, especially between Isaac and the Doctor, but also Isaac and other characters going on throughout the season. We got to see Isaac betraying everyone and everyone feeling hurt by that and us believing that and understanding that. But also Isaac choosing to help the Orville crew because of his relationships that he had formed and how hard that was for him. A character that we had seen struggle to understand emotion over and over and over again. Finally getting that payoff was brilliant and worked fantastically. Just a really, really great episode. And again, that would happen over and over and over throughout the entire season. Beginning of the season, we got this relationship drama between Ed and Kelly, with Ed basically wanting to get back with Kelly, but Kelly not really wanting to do that. And at the end of the season, we get that coming back with a brilliant penultimate episode where Kelly from the past comes and meets her future, and Ed realizing that he has moved on, that they have changed, and that's a good thing. And Ed finally coming to terms with the fact that they can't be in this relationship anymore because they aren't the same people, and that's okay. And then the finale, weaving in all of that, the Ed and Kelly relationship and the stuff with Isaac and the invasion in this really great episode that normally I hate the wipe the slate clean time travel episodes, but I thought this worked because it really paid off fantastically a ton of storylines that were going throughout this season. And we also got some other really great stuff too with the race that Bortus is from, also having this weaving thread of being a really terrible race, offensive towards women, homophobic, sexist, misogynist, all these things, but living in this really ideal society. But how can a utopia really have these sort of people in it? How can they accept these people in it? And it's a narrative thread that I'm really curious to see continue out throughout the season. And I'm glad they brought back the issue on women that was raised in season 1, because I thought that episode was very disappointing to me specifically, as someone who talks a lot about gender and trans representation and intersex representation as well. I was really glad to see them not sort of give up on that and have it not be just a one-off episode, especially since the episode in season 1 kind of, I think, muddled the message. And I've written articles on that, so you can go check those out if you're interested in. And so that's what I think really, really worked about the Orville this season. Just being a really distinctly episodic show that I can pick up and just enjoy a single episode of it, unlike Discovery where, you know, I enjoy watching it, but you have to watch every piece of it to really understand the tapestry that it's trying to give you. Whereas the Orville, I can pick up little pieces, but it really feels like it's building on what came before, that it really is paying off these long storylines. Now, I do want to talk about a couple negatives about the show that I think would really help even push it even further as a really great science fiction show next season. First off, because I'm LGBT and my channel is all about LGBT issues, I kind of have to bring up this fact that while the Orville is doing much better about talking about LGBT and gender issues this season, I think they really dived into it very well, all the LGBT issues are being told through Moclan society and the issues that Moclans are dealing with. Again, gender and identity and sexism and things like that. It's sexuality, it's all being told through a metaphor through the Moclans. Like we got in the episode Deflectors, this issue of this guy in Moclan society who is straight, and being straight is outlawed in their society. Basically a metaphor for what it's like to be gay in our society. And they really kind of pushed the tone of like 1920s America, especially they had part of the episode set in a holodeck recreation of 1920s. So it really was hitting that metaphor on the head. It wasn't being subtle about it. But again, there's no real direct LGBTQ representation in this show. And I talked about that in another video, so go check that out. I would like to, and again, this is my personal preference, and I'm sure someone out there in the comments is going to start ranting about like, you don't need to have gay people in every single show and they're addressing LGBTQ issues. But I also think in a show like The Orville or Star Trek or things like that, if you want to talk about utopian society, I think we're at the point where you can include LGBT people as part of just the tapestry of your world, that some of these characters are gay or straight or trans or bisexual or whatever, and that being okay. But for the most part, we only really got straight characters other than Moclans who are a metaphor for being gay. But even in their society, it's not really talking about LGBTQ issues unless it's, again, in this distinct metaphor. I think there's something to be said about talking about those issues and talking about them in a metaphor that sort of lets people back up and sort of examine their prejudice through a sort of distanced lens. I think that's really important to do and a good storytelling method to address and talk about. But I also think you can include some LGBTQ characters and just say like, hey, they're accepted, they're fine, it's okay. Now, that's just me, and again, I'm probably making a bigger deal out of it than it necessarily has to be. I'm not saying that this show is horrible because it doesn't include any gay characters, because there are other shows that I love that do that as well, but I also think that this show has a chance to do that, and it really shouldn't just have all of its LGBTQ issues addressed in metaphor, because that's something that they were still doing back in the 80s and 90s of Star Trek The Next Generation, only dealing with LGBTQ issues in metaphor. And I think we have come to a point where we can kind of move past that and do something new with it. I'm sure someone in the comments is going to be angry at me about that, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that and just have a calm discussion, because I'm curious if people disagree or agree with me on that. Another thing that I really think that the Orville can do that can really help it stand apart is I think it needs to rely less on riffing on Star Trek specifically. Now, don't get me wrong. I think that some of the best episodes of this season are directly riffing on Star Trek and Star Trek The Next Generation. You can't look at the episode Identity and not be thinking about how that episode is influenced by the best of both worlds. You can't look at episodes like Deflectors and not think of The Outcast on Star Trek The Next Generation. You can't look at an episode like A Happy Refrain and not think about the earlier episode that they did on Star Trek The Next Generation with Data and his relationship. It is clearly really pulling from Star Trek. And it goes to say that the show is obviously a riff on Star Trek in general, and a lot of the writing staff of the Orville comes from Star Trek and its history, like Brendan Braga and people like that. And what's surprising is I think that this show, for the most part, improves upon those episodes. Again, for the reasons that I stated, that they can kind of build these arcs out over a longer period of time than Next Generation really could. And I think they're updating them for a modern day audience in a really interesting way. And so I really do enjoy and like that. And I don't want them to stop riffing on Star Trek because I like that sort of updated take on Star Trek. But I do think that the show really does feel like it's relying on Star Trek quite a bit. And as much as I love Star Trek, I think the show's writing staff has proven to me that they have the capability to do more than just riff and build off the same exact themes that have already been addressed before. And I'm not saying that they need to do a whole 180 and do something completely different. It's obviously going to have DNA of Star Trek in it for the entirety of the series run. But what I like most about the Orville is when they take those Star Trek ideas and really put their own twist on it, their own flavor on it, and not just directly building upon what's come before. And so I think next season, I would really like to see more episodes that, again, continue this arc, but really kind of push away from Star Trek episodes and do something that we haven't really seen before, both in Star Trek or science fiction or in this type of storytelling. What that really comes down to is telling really good character stories in an individualized episodic format. But I want to hear what all of you have to say on it. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on the Orville, whether you think it was better, worse, the same, if it really was improving upon itself, if you really think it does need to step away from more Star Trek ideas, or you think it should lean into it more. I'm really curious to hear what that discussion is. All I ask is, like I said at the top of the episode, no hating on anybody. Please, if you like Discovery and hate the Orville, that's 100% okay. I want to hear those thoughts, but don't say people who like the Orville are dumb. Or vice versa, if you like the Orville and hate Star Trek Discovery, don't say you're not a real Star Trek fan if you like STD and blah, 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 blah. I really just can't stand that stuff. It reeks of gatekeeping. Like or dislike what you want, that's totally okay, and I encourage that, and I love to have that sort of discourse. But there's no need to hate on other people's likes or dislikes of a specific show. I really can't stand that. It totally bugs me, and I just don't want to see it in my comments section. Other than that, if you liked this video and want more reviews of science fiction shows, or you want really good dissections on Star Trek or issues within pop culture, check out my channel. I have a ton of videos like this, and even better ones that aren't just me rambling at a camera for 30 minutes and much more concise scripted stuff. I'm 100% certain you will not regret it. And if you want to make these videos even better, consider giving to my Patreon page. Every little bit helps improve the quality of these videos and helps pay my bills, which is sometimes really hard to do, especially at the moment. So honestly, I greatly appreciate any help you could give to improve these videos. And until next time, live long and prosper.